are going to finish up Joshua today, Joshua 24. Here we go. Are you ready? All right. Last week, we had talked about Joshua. He had already made he had witnessed to the elders of Israel, the heads of the heads of the tribes and the leaders and those folks who were administering the law to the people, and he's speaking to them, and he tells them that he basically recites their history to them, right? When they became a nation, when God called them out of Egypt, and as He brought them through safely to the Promised Land, as they defeated the people on the east side of the Jordan River, and then as they cross over Jordan into this land that He had prepared for them, and as He brought them safely over, and then He allowed them to act as His instruments of justice, didn't He? His instruments of vengeance. And His vengeance upon the citizens of Canaan was because their sin was great, and they were to be driven out of the land. So he goes into this history. Joshua basically gives this oral recitation of the history of the nation of Israel. Then he turns his attention to the group at large. The entire congregation of Israel came to hear Joshua. And he's getting older, and he knows that his days on this earth are numbered. So he begins to talk to them, and he basically tells them the same thing. And I want to kind of reiterate what we talked about this last time, the idea that Joshua makes them pledge something, right? He makes them pledge something before. There's something about being forced to pledge something in full view of everyone and making this pledge in public, orally, audibly. Okay, kind of like us, isn't it? Right? As Christians, aren't we required to do something publicly? Right? Audibly, out. What are we required to do? We confess, right? We confess. What do we confess? That Jesus Christ is the Son of God. It's the same thing that's been done since the beginning of the church. You know, the whole point was to acknowledge something. And what Joshua does is he requires the nation of Israel to acknowledge something. One is that God is God. There are no other gods. This is one of the first things he puts in the law, right? What's the first commandment? And thou shalt have what? I am Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. None. That's it. And it was upon that hinged the rest of the law. If you have one God, then you cannot with good conscience obey any other gods. Why do you think it was necessary that God required them to acknowledge that He was God and make this vow? Why was that? Why did He require them to acknowledge this and to make a vow that they would serve no other gods? Okay. Do you think it was because he knew his people and he knew that they could be weak in this area? I think so. God knows us. He knows us better than we know our. I don't know how many hairs are on my head. Fewer than there were last year, right? But I don't know how many of the hairs there are on my head. I know how many hairs are on your head. That's in the single digits, brother. But guess what? He does. He knows me. So He knew His people. And He said, my people are what? They are a stiff-necked people. They are. He knew from the beginning. I don't want to ask you. Have you ever had a child that you knew, this is the one that I'm going to have trouble with? Good child, has a good heart, but this is the one that's going to constantly test my patience. This is the one that's going to constantly work my nerve. Okay? You know that. God knew that about His people, didn't He? He knew they were going to be that. For that reason, He had to constantly put before them the fact that He was the God that did these things for. They didn't do these things on their own. He did them for them. So He had to constantly bring that to their remembrance, and He had to constantly put it before them that I am your God. You're not to serve any other gods, because if you do, you will quickly leave off serving me. I will be left in the dust and you'll go to other gods. Yes, sir.
I think it's very comparable to the great confession that we have to make today.
Yes.
I believe that you are the Son of God.
Yes. Yes. There's a reason that we make that pledge, and we make it. When I say publicly, I'm certainly not saying standing on the street corner saying that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Of course, I think if it came right down to it, we all would. But the fact that we are to confess before men, we're to make that confession before the group, before someone else. We don't merely say it to ourselves quietly. We're basically taking a pledge. You know, there's a wedding, we take vows, don't we? And we take those full vows in front of God and man, right? Sometimes they even say that in the service, before God and man. So the idea of making a public vow or a public confession or a public whatever it might be is certainly something it's nothing new. This is something that we do. We make that confession that Jesus is the Son of God before people, in full view of everyone, not quietly to ourselves. This is the same thing. He makes them acknowledge who God is. That He is the God that brought them out of Egypt. He is the God that allowed them to defeat everyone that they encountered. He allowed them to defeat them. He was the one that brought them to that place. He was the one that delivered that land to them. And then He tells them something. He says, and verse 14. I want to go back to verse 14. You know, He's given them. And I like this. He says, "I've given you a land for which you did not labor." And I think this is kind of. I don't know many people that really grasp this. The nation of Israel basically would walk into a town that they had defeated. They began to live in the houses that they didn't build. They began to plant and tend gardens and fields that they didn't plant. They were raising livestock that they didn't raise. They were not responsible for. God just basically, you know, you're talking about land flowing with milk and honey. Can you imagine that? Just somebody taking you to a place and saying, "Here's your house. You didn't have to build it. Okay? You didn't have to do anything for it. I did it all for you. I'm giving it to you." Who does that sound like? "Behold, I go to prepare a place for you." Okay? I go to prepare a place for you. We're not building that house. That's a house not built with hands. I'm not any part of that. That's my reward for serving Him. I'm not building that house. So basically, I'm going to be brought to a place where there is. And I'm using the terminology that we understand. There is a mansion prepared for me. There's a place prepared for me. A house not built with hands. And here I am. And it's going to be basically handed to me for my obedience. This is what I love about the Old Testament. And I wish more people did a real study of the Old Testament. We look at the things that are going to be delivered to us. We look at the things that have been delivered to us. We look at the things that have been promised to us. We look at the things that have happened that lead us to where we are. And you see so much of that in the Old Testament. You see all of that. You see types and antitypes that have been brought forward into the New. As the Israelites crossed over that Jordan River into a land that was going to be handed to them, they merely had to be obedient to God. You notice He didn't say, "Hey, you're going to go and fight it out with these armies, and whoever wins, so you just need to fight a little bit harder than the guys that you're fighting against. You just got to be better than they are. And if you could do that, you can have this land." But that's not what He said, is it? That's not what He said. The first major battle over the Jordan River was what? Jericho. What did they have to do for Jericho? They barely had to fight. You're just going to walk around the town. Keep walking. You're going to walk. And the people are thinking, "Here's the sword, and what am I going to do with this?" You just walk. Just do what I tell you to do. Walk around. So they walked around, and the walls came down. So you think, what does God actually really require them to do? If they had been completely obedient to God, it's likely that they would not have lost a single man. The only time we read about them losing someone was when they were in disobedience to God. That's the only time we read where they actually lost soldiers. All right? So take that to where it is today. What does God require from us? No more than He tells us. Nothing more. He says, "Here's what I want you to do. I'm not requiring anything else. I don't want you to add to this. Okay? If you add to this, that's on you, not on me. This is what I want you to do. If you will do this, then I'm going to take you over Jordan. I'm going to destroy your enemies, and I'm going to deliver you to a place that you have not worked for. All you have done is been obedient to me." I mean, the pieces fit together pretty well, don't they? God's Word is just, it's incredible, and it comes alive when you start reading it like this. Everything that we see in the old is brought forward to the new. All right? It says, I've given you a land for which you did not labor, and cities which you did not build. You dwell in them. You eat of the vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. He wants you to remember, He did all the heavy lifting. He did all the heavy lifting. So now what does Joshua say in verse 14? Now therefore fear the Lord, serve Him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. If you can't get anything else out of this, that last part of that, serve the Lord. Serve the Lord. That's all the way through Joshua. The entire book can be summed up in serve the Lord. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So there he is. He's delivered it to him. This is my lesson to you. This is what I want you to remember. This is what I want you to take to heart. Okay? In the idea of if it seems evil to you, I like how he phrases that. Because I'm trying to think how I really wanted to phrase this. The idea of being exposed to and acknowledge the God of the universe, the God of gods. There is no other God. There are no other gods. Any other gods are simply figures of clay and stone and wood and all of these things. So there is one God, and we're being required to serve them. I love how he phrases this. If you're not going to serve God, then it is evil. It is evil. All right? If it is evil to you to serve this God, then choose which one you're going to serve. Make your decision. Now make it today. All right? That's like us, right? Every day we have to determine what God are we going to serve today? What are we going to serve? We're going to serve the God that's going to take us safely over, or are we going to serve the God in whose land we dwell? That's this earth. Who's the God of this earth? Who's the ruler of this earth? Satan. Now, is God overall? Absolutely. I don't want you to take the wrong thing away from that. But if you look at the world the world in which we live, who is the overwhelming? Which God is overwhelmingly served by the people of this earth? Satan, by far. There are few that serve God righteously, in sincerity and in truth. So in that case, Satan is the god of this world, not over this world, but that's the God that this world serves. All right? So here he is. He's making that discernment. So today, what is it for us? We're being asked this question every single morning, right? Every time we get up. Choose this day who you will serve. Are you going to serve the God that is going to take you safely over? Or are you going to serve the God of this land in which we dwell? That's our question. All right? It's as accurate today as it was in the days of Joshua. That question hasn't changed, has it? All right. But then he makes this declaration that we see on posters and we see in stuff all over the place. But as for me and my house, we will what? Serve the Lord. All right. That's the pledge that he wants to hear from us. That's the decision that he wants us to make. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And here we go. So the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God is He who brought us up and our fathers out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, who did those great signs in our sight, and preserved us in all the way that we went, and among all the people through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out from before us all the people, including the Amorites who dwelt in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for He is our God. So they acknowledge Him, right? They acknowledge God as their God. They've claimed Him. All right. Same for us today. We claim God as our God, and we make that in full view and in the full knowledge of everyone around us. And the Lord, verse 19. But the people said Joshua said to the people, "You cannot serve the Lord, for He is a holy God." Now, when he says that you cannot serve Him, what does he mean by that? Is he meaning they physically cannot? They're not able to serve Him? No. What do you think he means by that? The idea of you cannot serve the Lord, for He is holy. Okay? Well, then why would he tell them that they cannot serve Him? Now, notice he said you won't serve Him. He says you cannot. What does that mean? Why does he say that? Eh, what's that? No, you can't. You can't serve God and mammon, right? We know that. It's a house divided. A house divided against itself cannot stand. So you're going to serve one and hate the other one, or you're going to love one and despise the other one. We read that in Scripture, and Christ makes that very, very apparent. Makes it very clear. You cannot have your foot in. You can't straddle the fence on that. Okay. There's no such. The idea. You hear about people who are, say, politically. You've got one party, you got the other party. You got people who are moderates. These are people who can kind of easily straddle, and they say, well, I see a little bit of good in this and a little good in this, and I can kind of easily navigate those passageways in regards to being a moderate. See, in Christianity and serving God, there is no moderation. Okay? You're either wholly in God's camp or you're not in God's camp at all. That's not the way. That's the way it works. You can't serve both. There's no way. So in that regard, no, you're right. But when he says you cannot serve the Lord, I don't believe that he is telling. I don't believe that he is making a statement of absolute truth here. And what I mean by that, I'm not saying he's not being truthful. I'm saying he's not making a statement of absolute truth, as in you are incapable and you will never serve God, because we know that they did. Okay, they did serve God. They were close to him, and then they would fall away, and then they would get close to him again. So they can serve him. I think what he's doing, he's making a statement. He's using a kind of like a little bit of hyperbole here. The idea is he's making this grand statement to kind of bring a point home to them. He's wanting to make sure that they understood the magnitude of what it is that they're being required to do. He's wanting to make sure that they understand the importance of what they're being required to do, and that's serving God. Because look at what he says. He follows up that little statement. He finishes that with this. He says, you cannot serve the Lord, for He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions nor your sins. So I think what he's trying to get across to him here is, he says, I don't think you can serve Him, because even now He's having to tell them to put away the gods that are amongst them. Even now, the children of Israel, while they still claim to serve God, He's having to make them acknowledge this again, because they are already actively involved in worshiping other gods. Many of the households had household gods that were taken from the Amorites and the gods of the land of Canaan. When these people left, not everybody left. Some stayed behind. They were already beginning to take wives and husbands from other nations and all of these things. And I think what he's telling them here is he wants to drive home the importance of the pledge that they've just taken. You can't serve Him, because He's a holy God. He's a jealous God, and He's not going to forgive this. He's not going to let this go. And we know that God didn't, did He? It took a while for that punishment and that judgment to come upon Israel, but it did. It was visited upon them many generations down the road. But God's anger was already being kindled against Israel, because they were already going into idolatry, and He was angry. All right, and remember, the great thing about God is long suffering. All right, He allows, He sometimes overlooks. But at the end, that sin will be punished. He's wanting to make sure they understand how important this is. He says, if you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then He will turn and do you harm and consume you after He has done you good. Well, boy, that's, in this case, Joshua's a little bit like a prophet, isn't he? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It is. Yeah. Yep. You're right. You think about what the Lord said about a little leaven. Okay, what constitutes a little leaven? All right, you get a batch of dough, and you put just a tiny, now it may not give you the whole effect that you were thinking it was going to give you if you put just a little bit of yeast or a little bit of leaven in there, but even a little bit of leaven will do something, won't it? Because leaven self-propagates, doesn't it? It's not something that it goes this. I read the other day there's a lady in Oregon or somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. She's using a sourdough starter that's been in place for 125 years, using the same sourdough starter. What's happening there? It's self-propagating. So if you get a tiny bit of yeast or tiny bit of leaven, what does that do? It says it leavens the whole lump. So yeah, even those little small fragments of old stuff from way back when, and we look at it and we think, there's no way we would do anything like that. But then we see those little tiny little things. Those tiny little things. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, well, you get even. I've known some folks, not personally, but I know of even some good. I say good because they were good. They were good members of the church. They were faithful members of the church, but they would do things that you would think you would never find a member of the church doing. I know of a couple of ladies, and I'm not going to tell you their names. You might know them. They're not in the congregation, but they're local, and they would go to palm readers. You think, yeah, and now you think about that. You say, it's foolishness, but is it really harmful? Well, a little leaven leavens a whole lump. Okay. Are you going to let that? You going to let some quack look at your palm and say that give you life advice based on how your lines in your hand run? But that's what they were doing essentially. Okay. Yeah. I eat a fortune cookie, but I look at the fortune, I'm thinking, some other guy on the other side of town got the same one I got. I mean, that's that. This isn't tailored to me. So, but we have to be very careful about that, and we see what happens with the nation of Israel, don't we? We see what happens when the tiny little bit of leaven got caught up in that nation. All right? They weren't. One of the problems was they allowed it in, and the other problem was they weren't faithful in purging it out. God gave them a very specific set of instructions about what they were to do in cases of this, that, and the other. But they were very capricious in how they administered that. This person, if they were caught in adultery, they died. This person caught in adultery, no, we're not going to do it. This person caught in witchcraft, we put them to death. But then we see where Saul went and consulted a medium. Why did he not slay her where he found her? That was his responsibility. If anyone caught practicing witchcraft was to be killed, purged out of Israel. They weren't even supposed to be allowed to live. You shall not allow someone who does that to live. But they allowed them to live. So part of that is not only allowing it in, but the other part of it is the failure on the part of the congregation to purge out the evil when it was encountered. And those little things come in, and then pretty soon it's infected the entire thing. You could have a barrel full of perfectly ripe, beautiful red apples, beautiful. I mean, they're going to taste so great. You allow the tiniest little bit of rot on one, just a little bit of a brown spot on one. You put it in that barrel. How long do you think you take before you take the lid off that barrel and every single one of those apples in there is rotten and no good? No time at all. Doesn't take long. One generation. We read one generation. All right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. He gives them this warning. I mean, and this warning cannot be overstated. It cannot be overstated. It is so important. He said he's warning them. He said, God has done you good, but if you turn away from Him, if you serve other gods, then He will turn and He will consume you. And that's exactly what He did. This is prophecy on the part of Joshua, and Joshua was not known as a prophet, but He knew what would happen when the children of Israel left God and went into idolatry. That the Lord is going to turn and He is going to consume them. And that's exactly what ended up happening. But here we go. As almost everybody's case, you're right. The people said to Joshua, "No, but we will serve the Lord." Now, in that moment, do you believe that they meant it? Absolutely. Sure they did. They were sitting there going, "Well, we'll tell Joshua something. He's an old man. He's going to die soon. We want to make him feel good. So we'll just, we're going to serve." No, I believe wholeheartedly they meant it. Here they've heard, once again, it's been brought to their remembrance what God's done for them. And what all they've accomplished, what all they've been blessed with simply for their obedience to God. So at this point, people are like, we're going to serve the Lord. Absolutely, 100%. So Joshua said to the people, "You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord for yourselves to serve Him." Right? You are witnesses against yourselves. You've made a public vow. Okay? You've made a public vow that you will do this thing. That's like these people, we have elected officials. They take that public vow, and then they turn around and they're as much a scoundrel as the next guy, right? That's why, if a politician's lips were moving, you know what? They're lying, right? I don't mean to be that cynical, but it's unfortunately a lot of times we find that. We look at it and we think. Anyway, all right. And not only that, you got people who will with one breath say these great things about this, and then turn around with the next breath and say evil things about this. You look at people who you look at Hollywood, you look at the sports industry, you look at the entertainment industry, you look at all of these things, and you see people who are double-tongued. They say one thing, they do another. They say one thing about this is perfectly okay in this context. Over here, it's a bad thing all the way around. That's why we don't put our trust in anything of this world. This is the God that this world serves. This world serves Satan. It does. And that's hard for people to understand. It's hard I say that sometimes and people look at me and they think, "No, most people are good." I said, but it's not just a matter of simply being a decent person or a kind person. How are we truly good? We're only truly good when we're serving God. Okay? We're only truly good when we're serving God. Because what we're doing is we're acting godly. We're acting Christ-like. That's where the goodness is found. And that's not what we find in this world. We find people who are double-tongued, they're slanderous, they countenance evil. And we have to be very careful that we put no faith and no trust in the things of this world. It's funny, there are people who are world leaders, and I would trust anybody in here before I trust them. I wouldn't let them hold my wallet. I'd let most everybody in here hold my wallet. Would you? For a small fee? Okay, anyway, let's do this. So, and they said, "We are witnesses." So they acknowledge this. They take that, they accept that responsibility. They are their own witnesses. Okay? They don't write anything down. They are their own witnesses. So everyone who saw them say, "We will serve the Lord." Now, therefore, he said, "Put away the foreign gods which are among you and incline your heart to the Lord God of Israel." That idea of inclining means simply this: we lean upon Him. We incline towards Him. All right? You see a lot of trees, if they grow up in windy conditions, you see they lean into the wind, right? To give them that little bit of leverage so that they don't flop over. They slowly lean towards it. A lot of plants incline towards the sun. They bloom and they actually follow the sun. Sunflowers do that. You'll see them. Now they don't turn around all the way around on that, but they'll just slowly, imperceptibly, they'll go along with the sun. Here he's saying, incline your heart towards Him. Make sure that whatever happens to you, no matter what the situation is, however your heart goes, it needs to go towards God in every condition, no matter what it is. Even if it costs you something, even if it's a little bit painful, even if we have to give up something, we always incline towards God. And the people said to Joshua, "The Lord our God we will serve, and His voice we will obey." So again, they acknowledge this a second time. God is our God. We will obey Him. We will not obey the world. We will obey God. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and made for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. Then Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone. Here we go, those stones again, right? And he set it up there underneath the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, Behold, this stone shall be a witness to us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord which he spoke to us. It shall therefore be a witness to you, lest you deny your God. So anytime the people found themselves in error, what they're hoping is that, at least if they're in Shechem, they can look over, they see that rock, and they remember the pledge that they made. The problem is the only people that are going to remember that pledge, if it's not continually brought before them, the only people that are going to remember that pledge are who? People that were there. So what happens to the generations after and the generations after? What has to be done for the generations to come? We have to train them, right? We train up a child. We train up a child. We train up a child. And when they were told this is what that was, they would remember it. But what happens when there's no longer instruction? There's no longer instruction. Okay? Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we require, our memories sometimes are very short, especially our selective memory is very short, isn't it? You know, when we have selective memory, we don't remember near what we probably ought to remember. So what has to constantly happen? We have to constantly be reminded. You know, and that's why people say, you know, I don't know why, you know, why do we have the Lord's Supper every Sunday? Why do we have the Lord's Supper every Sunday? Well, because, well, for one thing, it's because that was the doctrine of the apostle. That's what we do. That's what the church did. But why do you think it's so important? Why do you think it's so great that we have it every week? You know, see, some people would say, it loses its value. It loses its impact when you have it every Sunday. You know, once a quarter or on important holidays is good enough. That kind of really makes it important. The funny thing is, I've attended so many communion services. I've partaken of the Lord's Supper longer than I haven't, and never once has it lost any kind of meaning for me. Never once. I never look at it and say, oh, here we go again, it's Lord's Supper, okay, all right, here. No, it always means something to me. You know, something, and when it doesn't, it's typically because my frame of mind is that it's not. Not because it isn't. Not because inherently it isn't, it's just simply because my frame of mind. It's on me, not on God. So there's a reason that we partake every first day of the week. It keeps it continually before us. And make no mistake, this is the reason that the early church came together, was to break bread. And the worship service that we understand grew up around that breaking of the bread. So really, the all-important reason that we're here this morning is to do that. We need to continually keep this before us, and that's the beautiful thing about it. Yes, sir?
How's that argument for it? Get old or get used? Well, how about a man when he comes home from work and he doesn't dress his wife? Does that get old?
I tell you what, it would not be good for a man that if he came home and didn't say something to his wife, acknowledge his wife. That would not be a good thing. All right, it would be I would dare say it would be a contentious marriage before very long if it was just simply no, you're right. All right, continually brought before us, right? All right, so he continues on. He says, so Joshua let the people depart, each to his own inheritance. And here we go. This finishes the book. Now it came to pass after these things that Joshua, the son of Nun, servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. They buried him within the border of his inheritance. Remember, he was given his own land, separate from the tribe, separate from everyone, because of his service to the Lord. They buried him within the border of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah, which is in the mountains of Ephraim, on the north side of Mount Gaash. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had known the works of the Lord, which he had done for Israel. So we know that his admonition of them carried on for a while, right? So they served all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived him. So that admonition was kept fresh in their minds. They were continually brought before the people so that they remembered who it was that they served. The bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel had brought up out of Egypt, they buried at Shechem in the plot of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and which had become an inheritance of the children of Joseph. And Eleazar the son of Aaron died. They buried him in a hill belonging to Phinehas his son, which was given to him in the mountains of Ephraim. And that's it. That's the book. Any questions about it? Anybody anything they want to say about it? It's a interesting narrative because it's very straightforward, and a lot of it's taken up in the idea of the giving of the inheritance of the land. And I did a little bit of it. I did not plot out every single inheritance that was given to every single tribe because that got tedious. And a lot of the maps that we have aren't always exact according to what the Bible they understood then. But God gave them a very specific one, and here's your land, and that land is an inheritance for you forever. It cannot be taken away from you, and unless what? Unless they were unfaithful. And guess what happened? They were unfaithful, and the land was taken from them. They came back to a land that was no longer theirs. They had to live amongst the Samaritans, which had taken most of their land after the carrying away. And that of course began one of the big feuds of that time was the Samaritans and the Jews. They did not get along, and that was one of the major reasons. Yeah, we got to be very careful. All right, thank you. I don't know.